Okay, hey, welcome everybody to the second of a series of probably five faculty panels where we are aiming to connect the generations of Antiochians to the current faculty who are creating the next generation of Antiochians as we speak. I'm Brian Norman. I'm the Vice President for Academic Affairs. I've met some of you, and I'm looking forward to spending time, hopefully, with all of you at some point. I joined Antioch just this year in July of 2022, and I joined at a consequential moment for Antioch. I think everyone has an appreciation for that. And I'll just say very briefly that I came here because I believe in the mission. I am inspired by the history, and I believe firmly in the need to secure Antioch's future. And the more that I've been at Antioch, the more I am hopeful and buoyed by our possibilities for the future and the ability of the current faculty to help set that course. And we're going to give you a little peek into what that means for us. So this is a moderated conversation, so I will be introducing our four faculty panelists very soon and very briefly. And then I've got a few structured questions that we'll have a conversation for about the first half, and then we'll open it out, and you all will also have an opportunity to join the conversation and ask some questions. I'm looking forward to that. First, a couple thank yous. Thanks to Tristan Neveska for organizing this panel and for having the good sense to put these panels on and realize that a lot of our future depends on finding really good ways to connect the generations of alums who have made the very existence of Antioch and its current incarnation possible with the folks who are charting its future. So I'm grateful for that. And I think we also have Eric Miller on the call, who has also been an integral part of realizing the great bounty of the alumni network and finding new ways to connect that to what we're doing at Antioch, especially connecting it to our current students and their prospects for going on to do the good work in the world that Antioch is so good at training them for. So let me just share a little bit of context of this moment at Antioch, and then we'll jump into it. So as some of you know, a lot of our work this year, inspired by a strategic plan as well as necessitated by the current moment at Antioch and higher ed, has been to really focus and work together as a faculty and the rest of the Antioch community to work on a shared academic vision. And this emerging vision is focused on interdisciplinary strengths, identifying some signature dishes, some things that we do really well or think we can do really well and want to be known for, and Antioch's current reality as a small place of both abundance and action. One of those five-ish areas of interdisciplinary strength is around the area of social justice, very broadly conceived. We, as faculty, are thinking through exactly what that means at Antioch in our curriculum. But it's one example of what we can or should be known for at Antioch, and it's one example of the kind of interdisciplinary strength that brings faculty together across courses, across areas, across disciplines, and it's also helping us forge really deep and important connections with other professional staff and some of the campus assets, or as Jane Fernandez is starting to call them, hubs of activity or learning and action that are really unique and special at Antioch. And the one that's on my mind for today's conversation, of course, is the Coretta Scott King Center for Intellectual and Cultural Freedom. And I think we have Shadia Alvarez joining us as well, who's the executive director of that. I am very conscious that we, especially around the area of social justice, are building on a long history of a college that changes lives, but also creates graduates who go on to create change in the world, both in their profession and in their communities, and sometimes in the world more writ large. I'm also conscious that we're drawing on Antioch's own history of often being on the forefront of social justice issues nationally, be it, the student movement or civil rights activism in the 60s and onwards, redefining what sexual health and affirmative consent means, especially with students from the 90s. And today, I would argue that we're actually leading the way among liberal arts colleges in showing what a truly accessible liberal arts college experience looks like, especially with the range of students that we're serving, a quarter of whom at least are the first in their generation to go to college. At almost half of our students identify as students of color. Over 3/4 of our students are eligible for the federal Pell Grant, which is an indicator that expected family contribution is at or near zero. So it's a marker of pretty profound financial need. And about the same amount of our students also identify in some way as LGBTQIA+, which is a very expansive category for this generation of students. So Antioch is a really rich and diverse place of belonging, and we are showing how transformative liberal arts education can be accessible to those for whom it can most change their lives, who can most benefit. So I'm really proud of that too. And as I was preparing for today's conversation, that gives me a chance to learn just a little bit more about alums, including those who are on the call or said they might join us. And here are some, but not all of the things that I learned as I was thinking about how our commitment to social justice, broadly conceived, really becomes real in the way that graduates go on to live that out and show us what that looks like in action. So we have somebody who graduated in chemistry and went on to a really important career as a project manager in Silicon Valley, but also is a key driver in the slow food movement. Or somebody who studied Asian studies in their time at Antioch and who went on to be a leader in global health, especially around health inequity. Somebody, a more recent graduate who was really active in ComSil, so community governance, and had a co-op in DC and is now expanding democratic participation through Congress as an institution. There's somebody on the call who has a 4 decades plus career in civil rights and fair housing, and also all along the way had a personal commitment to helping low-income students get to college in order to break multi-generational poverty. We had someone who has a career as both a designer and an entrepreneur who invented low-cost shelters that could be helpful in disaster relief and housing insecure. A scientist who is applying their chops in policy and analytical skills to international development in Africa and elsewhere around reproductive health and AIDS. And we have a former president who I haven't gotten a chance to meet yet, but one story I've or have a long conversation with, but I learned that at one point skipped some of the Antioch classes in order to try to oust then Senator Joseph McCarthy, but then went on to actually build institutions and trying to build just institutions, be they founding women's studies programs or becoming president of Antioch College. So it's a really great reminder for me that students might study a particular topic or a particular discipline at Antioch, but really they learn it in this interdisciplinary environment of engaged and applied learning. And that is really what we're doing today as well, because it's the best way to help students understand the complexity of the world and be really well equipped to analyze and understand complex problems and work toward creative, collaborative, effective solutions, be they around global health or sustainable food systems, voter disenfranchisement, housing insecurity. And it's really neat to see that learning in action. From alums, and I look forward to hearing from current faculty about what that looks like today in their own work and in their students' lives. So with that, let me get out of the way and introduce our panelists by way of having them introduce themselves by sharing their name, their pronouns, their role at Antioch, and about one sentence on what social justice means to them at Antioch, because that is a leaky but important term that we're finding out what it means for us. And I'll just go on the order that folks are appearing on my screen. So let's start with Michael Casselli.
Hello, Michael Casselli, class 87. I am chair of the arts division, associate professor of sculpture and installation, and the new creative director of the Herndon Gallery. My pronouns are he, him, or the inclusive they. And when I think about social justice, because it's such a large term, it has so many facets to it. I reflect on the work, my scholarly work, and my ability to bring that work to my students. And then we can work at looking at it through new lenses. Something that's really important to me is looking at art history through an anti-colonial lens. And so in that work, I'm expanding my knowledge, and I'm also sharing and having exchange with students through kind of a dialogic approach to learning.
Sorry. Thank you, Michael. Kevin Magruder.
Good evening. I am an associate professor of history, and my pronouns are he, him. And when I think of social justice, what came to mind to me this evening is Langston Hughes. When he did public readings, and he did a lot of them, he usually ended them with his poem, I Dream a World. And the first lines of it are, I dream a world where man no other man will scorn, where love will bless the earth and peace its paths adorn. And as a historian, what I'm trying to do with my students is, in part, in teaching US history, is to help them understand why we don't have that world now and the different barriers that understanding history will allow them to see how they were constructed. And I believe if they can see that, then they can begin to think about what can be done to dismantle those barriers. And I look for all kinds of opportunities to make links with contemporary issues and historical issues around those themes.
Thanks, Kevin. Carey Campbell.
Hi, everybody. I was a little bit nervous before this meeting, and now hearing the impressive list of your contributions, I'm even more nervous. I really didn't realize how much depth there was here. I'm Carey Campbell. My pronouns are il, lui, son, ça, c'est. I am the French professor. Don't let that fool you, though. My expertise straddles France and its canon of literature and Africa, and I'm most interested in questions of nationalism in the African context. Social justice for me, I have an uneasy relationship with the term. I'll be honest with that up front, and a lot of the scholars that I read and deal with also do. And I think for me, as much as I am enthusiastic about bringing down power, I also think social justice in my own practice and in my classroom has to be about preparing students to make considerate and informed judgments about where to make contributions themselves, and not to impose it on them, but just to help them make cross-cultural comparisons, especially that enable them to see things in a new way for themselves and see ways to contribute to equity, justice, liberty in the world. So I'll leave that with you.
Thanks, Carey. Jennifer Grubbs.
Hi, everyone. It's an honor to be here. I'm an assistant professor of anthropology, soon to be associate professor. It was very anticlimactic to get tenure and still be an assistant professor for a year. My pronouns are she, her. And for me, social justice at Antioch, picking up on everything my colleagues have shared, is, as a social scientist, it's empowering them to ask questions. Power didn't just happen. It's not a lightning bolt that struck down. And so ask questions about how we are, where we are, and then be willing to imagine something different and show up to do whatever that imaginative new thing is. That's what I would say that at Antioch, that is how I approach social justice work, is empowering them to ask questions.
Thanks, Jennifer. And we are actively working on that 10-month delay problem for the future. Thanks for signaling that problem to be addressed. So wanted to do a few questions to get a flavor, some snapshots of what interdisciplinary strength and social justice means in people's teaching and their scholarship, and the unique things that we can do at a place like Antioch and some of its assets. So let's start with teaching, as we always should. There's such a range of courses on offer across the disciplines, across our divisions, that in some way equip students to think differently about the world and sharply about social justice in the way that my colleagues have been describing. And some of them are really special. A couple in my mind, Dr. Grubbs right now is offering a special course during our November block that meets in the Coretta Scott King Center on COINTELPRO, and as a really good example of theories of violence and power. Or Jennifer and Kevin co-taught a course on race and ethnicity this past fall, which was a really neat, I think, experience for our students. There's some really neat stuff going on in the classroom. So I wanted to hear directly from some of my colleagues. What is your favorite course to teach that is related to social justice? And what have you learned from students in the process? I should have said, and raise your hand. I can cold call on
I can go
but
first.
Go for it.
So I'm gearing up to go back to teaching inside of Dayton Correctional next quarter, which is inside of a women's prison. And I do these classes with Antioch students and women who are incarcerated. And what's interesting about that class in terms of how it gets them thinking about social justice is it's not prescriptive. I'm not telling them what to think about incarceration and about reasons that people end up in prisons and compassion and justice, but yet those become core themes. And much of what students learn is not what I'm trying to deliver. It's experiential. They're really experiencing the learning and the curriculum by being there. So that's an upcoming class. I've been doing that before the pandemic and then switched to online. So I'm very excited to get back in person inside the prison.
Great, thanks. Kevin, go for it.
I teach a class, History 370, which is cross-listed as Literature 370, and the subtitle is Race, Sex, Scottsboro, Race, Sex, Gender, and Justice in the Segregated South. And so it looks at the Scottsboro Boys case from the 1930s, which is a case of 9 Black teenagers in Alabama who are stopped on a rail car that they've jumped on during the Depression. And in that car are 2 young white women who are also, they're all looking for work, but that scenario leads to the teenagers being accused of rape and the women feeling disempowered to deny that, even though they know that didn't happen. And it becomes a major, really worldwide case. The Communist Party comes to the defense because the NAACP feels that the defendants are not quite up to snuff in terms of the kinds of defendants that they look for. And I designed this with Geneva Gano, the first literature professor at Antioch, and co-taught it with her. And it's such a great experience. There's a lot of literature, plays, poems that come from that. And we also look at the history of it. And what I particularly like about it, I've taught it once with Geneva, twice by myself. And each time I teach it, there are things that are happening in the world related to social justice. the Ava DuVernay film, When They See Us. The last time I taught it, I showed that. That's about the exonerated five of Central Park. And students are very clearly able to look at things that are in the world now and understand how this 1930s case is not, it's not something that's in the past. There's still a lot of unfinished business around justice, criminal justice, that we still need to address.
Thanks, Kevin. Carey, we'll hear from one more, and then I'll ask another question. Go for it, Carey.
Yeah, thanks. So I kind of actually struggled with this question because I think probably my favorite one isn't a traditional course in a sense. It's a capstone course that is taught almost like an independent study for whoever in that particular semester is an advanced language student going on an immersion co-op. We call it our capstone course. And they each kind of design their own research projects to do while they're in country, while they're also working at a job in country. And we've had a variety of countries this has touched. And while I'm sure you're all familiar with co-op and its advantages and how part of the drive as they're becoming advanced students is to attach a co-op that advances their academic or pre-professional sort of outlook. They're also doing these projects that I think really bring to life for them how their international experience is meeting up with their new educational expertise and emerging education and their outlook on what kinds of jobs they might be able to do here in the US. I've got a current student, for example, who just finished working with a family in France that happened to run a nonprofit that deals with helping connect hearing impaired with the correct hearing aids that they might need, especially those that are that have challenges accessing these for various reasons. And so the nonprofit connects them. She herself is interested in business and enterprise. And so as she's seeing how the French handle this nonprofit thing, she's starting to conceive of how she might put together a nonprofit in the US scenario to do this kind of service work that I think is helpful and needful and contributes to an area of social justice.
That's great. Thanks, Carey. Adding a layer onto here, I had mentioned that I'm struck by Antioch as a small place of abundance as a newcomer, and just seeing this just layers of really unique things that our campus alone has, and opportunities for how that ends up intersecting with our faculty's work with students. And some of the ones on my mind for this topic are, I mentioned the Coretta Scott King Center for Intellectual and Cultural Freedom. I'm also thinking about just our commitment and our practice of community governance and its connection to participatory democracy. I'm thinking about the cultures and attitudes around social justice and gender justice and racial justice with our policies around sexual offense prevention and racial discrimination prevention. And thinking of, Jenny mentioned some of the prison justice initiatives. I'm also thinking about these small things that we haven't fully learned to incorporate into our work. For instance, we had an alum, Liz Flint's, in residence as artist in residence in the fall, and she showed me this little piece of campus that I hadn't even noticed before, right outside of the art building, which is a memorial to Mia Zapata, an alum from '88 who was violently killed in Seattle, and whose death ended up inspiring Home Alive, a musician-driven effort to create safety on the streets for those who are in need of safety in public spaces. So just everywhere, this campus is just oozing and breathing with these spaces of these layers of history and models of social justice. And so I wanted to hear from some of the faculty, how is your teaching or advising engaged with the campus, these facilities or traditions in some ways? And do you have thoughts on what our students are able to learn at Antioch that they might not learn elsewhere or in a traditional classroom? Go ahead, Michael.
Yeah, so yeah, you mentioned the Me as the Powder Memorial. That's my era of Antioch. She was a very good friend of mine, and all of those people involved. And I feel fortunate that I'm an alum and in the classroom, because I have a lot of the traditions and the histories that I've experienced from being here. But I like to share those in my teaching. A specific thing, the idea of memorial, in one of my class, we take that idea and try to dissect it. What is a memorial? What is it for? How has it been manifest in the past? And how are we going to think about it in our contemporary work and our contemporary critique? Because there's a lot of critique that goes along with it also. And I think I use the Mia memorial as it's so subtle. It's there and you would miss it if you didn't know it was there. But also, where's that power of those things that you happen upon? And what kind of power does that hold? It's, where does subtlety, where do those things play into an ability to make someone aware of something more so than kind of super large or super in their face? The importance of subtlety, the importance of quiet, and using that as a way to approach the work that they're doing in my classes. I'm sculpture and installation is very dominant in kind of how I teach. Also the idea of what space is and how space defines the activities that happen within it, and how you can use that also as a very, very powerful tool in affecting change, in starting conversation, in entering dialogue. So I think for me, yeah, I use the campus all the time because I know it really well. And I try to get my students to know and understand, but also let them know too that while my experience at Antioch was my experience at Antioch, and I'm not trying to recreate my experience for them, but I'm trying to make sure that they have access to the ethos around the education that we're providing and how powerful that is, and how they can go out into the world after accessing, and after 4 years, they're pretty much prepared to go out and go on to the next thing. They may take a break, but they're very much ready. I have a lot of students who are doing lots of important and interesting things out there because they learned about agency and the ability and the complexity of ideas and the way power operates.
Thanks. Does anyone else want to weigh on the use of the campus or experiential learning? Go ahead, Kevin.
About 5 years ago, Maceo Cofield, an alum from the early 70s, approached me about 60 reel-to-reel tapes of lectures from the Afro-American Studies Institute that another alum, Bill Brower, had. And he approached me. He knew I was interested in oral history, about might we possibly be able to get those digitized. And that led to almost a series of weekly phone calls with Bill and Maceo to talk about what we do about these. We ended up raising money through the 365 Project, which is a nonprofit here, and alums contributed, and we got those tapes digitized. Truth Garrett, who is the class of 2020, had just arrived to campus when we were doing this. Actually, it was when we made a presentation at the alumni reunion in 2018. It was the 50th anniversary, if I remember right, of that program. And Truth approached me about helping with this, and that led to independent studies, for him, also a grant through the Ohio Oral History and the Liberal Arts that was then managed by Brooke Bryan. And we're still kind of continuing to build on this. It's been dormant for a little while, but Steve McQueen, an alum who has returned now as a student, is beginning to work on doing oral history interviews with some of the alums who participated in the program, because it has, as you know, it has a complicated history, is viewed by different people in different ways. And so it's not necessarily the physical campus, but particularly I think for Black students to understand that Antioch has that history, because often when they look at alums who are participating, like now, they don't see a lot of Black alums. And so it surprises them that this happened. And so it's another way to kind of bring the campus to them through history.
That's great. And Kevin, I don't know if you know, we are looking actively to bring the Oral History Institute back to campus in the summer, now that we're on the other side of COVID and can gather again with and make it logistically feasible. That's great. I'm conscious of time, and I want to make sure to get a chance to ask a bit about faculty scholarship. You know, my own impression and admiration as I got here is, with a small campus, it requires faculty to really teach broadly and become deeply conversant and curious across traditional areas of knowledge and disciplinary divisions, so that faculty are deeply rooted in their particular area of training. But I observe are prompted to and able to and permitted to and called to ask bigger questions and more adventurous questions, not only in their teaching, but in their scholarship. And they might have at a larger institution where they're sort of a little more stuck in particular fields. So the question I have is, what questions about social justice are you pursuing in your research, and how has being a faculty member at Antioch in some way shaped your agenda or the questions that you're asking? Go ahead, Michael.
Yes, I would say my research, which is basically my studio practice, exhibition practice. My most current work right now is involved in a critique of capital punishment and the right of the state to take a life. This work, unfortunately, because COVID hit, I did have a exhibition, but as soon as I got the exhibition installed, the gallery was shut down. So the work's not been seen, but it's a piece I've been thinking about a lot, and the context to capital punishment as really a morally bankrupt system. How anyone could think that they have the power to take another person's life, officially take someone's life, is just offensive to me. And so the piece deals with using images like a crucifixion, but making it a crucifixion machine, and really making it a self-martyrdom machine. So you take that symbol of state power, which was the crucifixion, that method of execution, and say, no, now we're going to do it. If I want to self-martyr myself, I will, but I'm taking that away from you and I'm making it better, actually. And that was immediately across the room was a reconstruction of a lethal injection chamber. And the reason I put those two in, because a lot of people don't realize it, the lethal injection chamber is a crucifixion also. It's a cross. And so it's kind of this, it's called a tacit agreement, and it's this dialogue of the power of the state. And in a lot of ways, feeling like the state, in a subtle way, just took that power back, right? And the piece, when I built it, I didn't realize this, it was in someone's living room. That was their gallery. And it became much more powerful to think that this conversation is happening day to day in your house, but it's in your face, but it's not in your face. And then being a faculty at Antioch, it has shaped the way I listen, the way I choose when to speak, when not to speak, what my presence is in the room, and really become aware of how I am contributing to a power dynamic that we hope to make less hierarchical and more powerful, because we're doing it in a collaborative as opposed to a kind of loud voice.
That's great. Thanks, Michael. I think I might also turn to Jenny, Dr. Grubbs, who recently published a book on environmental justice, and I think is now moving into a project on food production and incarceration, and so sort of shows the way in which even some of our areas of industry strength have linkages. Our last panel was on sustainability, and I'm seeing a direct connection between your prior project and your current project. So I'd love to hear a bit more from you.
Yeah, I may have shared this with you, Brian, or Kevin at the retreat, but so I showed my students a documentary called Berkeley in the 60s, and they watched a few from that era within a 2-week span. And so we were discussing the Rainbow Coalition and how, the organization, and the students were in this like dismay, and they were reflecting on the 60s, and they said, they were so organized. They really had it all together. It was just so seamless. And I'm like, you're talking about the 60s in 2022. Everything in the past is thought about to make a little bit more sense after the chaos has ended. So don't be discouraged. It was chaotic then. It can be chaotic now, and it can still be beautiful and revolutionary. So with my own research, I'm interested in the chaos of social change, really, and the beauty and the simple and small ways sometimes that people resist. So I did a long study with environmental activists, and I was really interested in how they use political public theater. So I was really blending together performance studies, environmental anthropology, and then some feminist theory, and approaching all of that. And so I started teaching in the prison in Ohio and learned about the farms that they owned. The Ohio Department of Corrections owned hundreds of acres of farms, and people who were incarcerated worked on the farms, and they had a farm to table program within it. And they shut that down and sold the land. But I have since had really interesting conversations with people that, so at the men's prisons, they did a lot of raising cattle, slaughtering, and processing. And at the women's prison, they did a lot of planting and harvesting. And so the conversations that I've had with people at Lebanon Correctional versus Dayton Correctional, a men's prison and a women's prison, are interesting. And so, the kinds of questions that I ask, very much to Brian's point, are not solely within the realm of anthropology. They are bringing together other histories and literatures about social change and how it happens, how does it come about, and how is it sustained. And so people within the prison who are growing tiny micro farms outside of their cell, or who use part of the yard to like gather dandelions that they can bring back. And so it's not for food, but they use it as an apothecary, and they're looking for herbs. So interesting things. There's even been drones that are dropping seeds into prisons. So this is like where drones are being used as a mode of resistance, and people are flying drones over prisons and dropping in seeds, also dropping in other things too, that are less beautiful. But yeah, I hope that gives some insight into some things that I'm working on right now.
That's so fascinating. I am conscious of time, and I wanted to start to open out to our alums who have joined us by thinking about student outcomes. Like, one of the neat things is the surprising and really impactful stuff that our graduates go on to do. And I'm mindful of Carey's contribution earlier with the hearing devices. We can only sort of imagine and hope what that next step will look like. But with the folks gathered, and if Cary, you have any more to add to that, I'd want to turn to you and then start to allow alums to ask questions. And Joan is first in the stack, but let me turn to Cary just in case he wants to add anything more.
I actually don't. I'd be interested in the other questions coming. I think I said what I needed.
Okay, great. Thanks, Cary. Joan, go for it.
Okay. Classes that you described are either overtly political or at least adjacent to politics. And I'm wondering how much diversity of political opinions you find in your classes. And I would love to hear some anecdotes about how you handle political differences in your classes.
What a good question. I will just add, Joan, you might know one of the first ANTC, so Antioch courses that all of our students take is dialogue across difference. And so we're attempting to equip students to first recognize that there are differences of perspectives and then learn how to engage meaningfully across that. But I have the same question for the faculty, what that looks like in practice.
The point is about not just the student's ability to speak across difference, but how the faculty manage difference.
Yeah.
And I'm hoping that there really is some difference in your classrooms. It would be worse, I guess, if there were not.
I mean, I'm one of the faculty members that teach dialogue across difference, and the inspiration for that course was that we were finding that students entered very excited and eventually ended up in arguments that they characterize as hazing around these differences. And so we're trying to use that course to give them the skills to listen and talk to each other. And it's still a work in progress. I think that it's a challenge that particularly students who might have views that we would call conservative are rarely vocal. At least that's been my experience. I can, kind of probably think count on one hand the students that I know who have kind of made it clear how they felt, even though it was very different from how other students felt. There was a student, and Cary, you probably, I know you know her. I think she was a French concentration student, who was very clear about her faith traditions and her idea about, I guess, what I would call economic conservatism. I didn't know her well, but just observing her. And so I think that's something that we're still working on, creating safe classrooms where every student can speak and where we can, as faculty, also listen for views that might be different from the ones we hold ourselves. And so I don't, I definitely see that as a challenge that we're still working on.
Go ahead, Cary.
If I may take a second, I don't claim to have the full solution on all of this, and maybe being in a language classroom, there's an extra advantage where every time I bring up politics, it's always in a context of those other people that think this way, and so they can kind of externalize the problem in a way and examine it more objectively. But I think we still, I mean, it takes students some practice and maybe some stumbling around a bit before they catch on that there is value to the ideas and the backgrounds and the experiences of even people that they may want to cancel. And so I don't know, I guess in some of my French classes, just to bring out an example, students are shocked to learn that French government forbids statistics being taken on race or ethnicity or religion. And they've got this American mindset of, well, we need to measure it so that we can improve it. And the French seem to them to be sticking their fingers in their ears and saying, la, 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 we don't have any differences here. But slowly, as they get to think it through and maybe take up the idea that there's just a different philosophy, then they are allowed to make the decision for themselves about what philosophy they adopt. But if they don't remove their bias before they judge the other philosophy, they're going to distort what that philosophy even is. That approach, I think, is what helps them realize they can take a step back, they can take a moment of study that's different from the moment of judgment. I hope that addresses the question a little bit.
Other folks want to weigh in with some questions?
Well, yes, Hank Candler.
Go
I
for it.
wonder how that plays out with town and gown. I mean, in terms of practical issues. When I went to Antioch, the local movie theater was desegregated by Antioch students just the year before I got there. And while I was there, the local barber wouldn't cut black hair, and we organized carpools for students to go to some other nearby town to get their haircut until he realized he was losing all the business. So I wonder how that plays out, since you do live in a community and you're not isolated from it.
Such a good question. And Hank, as the faculty are thinking about responding, one of my first impressions of Antioch, I joined the reunion actually before I had started, which was a really wonderful way to enter the community through story. And one of the sessions, I didn't yet know everybody. It was just a lot of new faces, so I don't remember all the names. But there was one student from I think the era that you're describing, who was going back and rethinking the experience of that moment of activism, of desegregating businesses and doing that through boycotts and other things, and that is experienced, rightly so, as a sort of victory, right, through the at the time and through the haze of ensuing generations, but also now rethinking about, well, what was the consequence for that individual business owner and the community that I was for a short time, and rethinking, is that the tactic I would use today? And I really appreciated this propensity for reflection and rethinking those moments. But I will let other faculty join in on the town relations question. I've been trying to pay attention to that as well.
I mean, I've been pretty active here through my membership in the 365 project, and I serve as treasurer, and there's several historical projects that we've done. And so I'm not saying it's ideal, but just the fact that we don't have a wall, we don't have gates, I think is a metaphor for the kind of the level of welcome. We're part of the Great Lakes Colleges Association, which is 13 small liberal arts colleges, mainly in the Midwest. And when I talk with my colleagues, there's a lot more tension that I hear between town and gown than here. Although I think there are hints now. So the class that came in the fall, or the one that came in last year, I've heard them use the term Townies in talking about people in the village, which I'd never heard that used by the prior classes. And to me, I told Bill Fox, the VP of Student Affairs, if he could find an opportunity to explain, there's a class judgment to me in using that term. And the person who was using it in this case, the student, it was around people fumbling around using pronouns. And they also judged alums when they were saying that. And so we've got to, we have to be mindful to maintain relations that I think are pretty good, but not just take them for granted. And because each group of students brings a different mindset.
Kevin, I was hoping somebody would say that. I've also heard the word townie, and it just stunned my ears. And the students didn't understand the connotations of those words. It's interesting. Tony, I think you want it. And then Mark. Oh, Tony, if you're speaking, you have to unmute yourself.
I just want to add, I was a student at Antioch in the 60s, and townies was used all the time in just the pejorative way that it's being used now, and in a kind of snooty way, to be honest with you, a very snooty way. So for what it's worth, it has some historical antecedents. You know what, I live here in Yellow Springs. I work with Kevin on a number of projects. I work with Shadi on some projects too. And you know, this town, the town and the college are so intertwined and have been for years, decades. And so the fact that so we often reflect things that are happening at the college, and the college often reflects things that are happening in town, not so much because one is so influential on the other, but because we have so many similarities, which all in all, I think is a really good thing, a really good thing. But we are far from perfect, which we are learning about every day.
Thanks, Tony. I think Mark had a question.
Hi. Hello, everyone. I was at Antioch in the late 70s, early 80s, and I had a lot of friends who were proud townies. They called themselves townies. They didn't have anything to do with the college, except they had some friends there. And so I'm all against using any term that is pejorative. And I'm not sure that these townie friends of mine were claiming it as an act of rebellion so much as a sense of identity. And they recognize a class difference between them and the college kids. And they were fun, smart people. So I just wanted to throw that in there. Hello, everybody.
That's super helpful.
Yeah, I just want to jump in real quick, just about the relationship between the town and the college. I do a lot of volunteering. I have a lot of skills that are useful at different times. I worked in theater and performance and touring, and so I can run sound systems and I can do projection and I can do, so, and I've always felt really strongly about making those the way I support and create connection to the village is by volunteering and lending support to a number of different. I work with 365 with Kevin, Yellow Springs Speaks Up for Justice, and just I try to also in my students talk about and encourage an idea, a culture of volunteerism as a way to provide a community with something you can do, right, and be aware of going into that community and asking them what they need, as opposed to going into a community and saying, well, I think you should be doing this, this, and this. So I think that's one way, that kind of subtle system of adding support and creating connection, I think for me is a lot of ways through my volunteerism work that I do. And I have done since I moved back in 2008 to volunteer nonstop and try to reopen the college. So it's been quite a journey.
Thanks. I think we have time for probably 2 more questions if folks want to join in. Go ahead, Jenny.
I'll just add that the conversation around town gown, relationship between students and Yellow Spring villagers, village residents, it reminds me back to Joan's question about how do you handle political difference in class as well? Because I think part of the ways in which students see themselves as adversarial or as something other than the people in the village or the generation of people who live in the village. And so how we as faculty can facilitate, I take the role of facilitation really seriously in teaching. I think that that's one important way to spark these conversations and to bring them back into the classroom in terms of the ways in which students are perceiving and understanding difference between themselves and the people who live in the village. And it does remind me quite a bit of a stark example, because I think there's a lot of assumptions about political differences between people who live in the Yellow Springs village and people who don't. So I just wanted to add that.
It's great. And one of the things that's, distinct about Antioch education is that we normally ask students to leave campus and enter a community for a short period and then come back and do something good in the process. That is such a complex skill. So complex. I think I saw a hand. Was it Linda? Go ahead. And if you're talking, Linda, you'll have to unmute yourself. Great.
All this makes me really wish I could audit courses. I've had that wish for a long time. I guess there's a lot of new stuff being taught, but I never want us to stop learning. So if you can do anything about that, that would be great.
Well, I would love to tell you that we're actually trying to explicitly amplify that community audit option, which has always been on the books, but we're trying to make it real, especially during these neat new parts of the academic calendar during July and August and during November and December, where we offer kind of special courses and shorter courses and more experiential and accessible courses. And Eric Miller, who's on the call right now, one of his roles is to help us find both credit and non-credit bearing courses and workshops and institutes that would be interesting not just to our students, but also to community members. So we're actually experimenting it right now. I am taking an ASL class with our president, Jane Fernandez, and there's about 50% of our current students in there, and about 50% of us are villagers and faculty and staff at Antioch. And it's wonderful being a student again, but it's also a pilot for us to experiment with how to put something of value that is intentionally designed to invite community members in. And we have some pretty big ideas and plans for July, as early as July, probably making use not just of oral history as something that is of value and interest to folks at all different career and life stages, but also probably something that makes use of our sustainable high productivity micro farm for shorter periods of intense learning. So Linda, your question is so timely and spot on. Bruce has a question.
I just wanted to comment that, thinking ahead for Antioch and the importance of both retention and recruitment, and what is it that draws new students in, my sense of the graduates of the new Antioch being the real stories that need to be told, both graduates and current students. Not so much us older alums, but the graduates of the current Antioch. And that the more authentic and from the core self-expression that those stories can be, I think the more social justice they will be reflecting, because we have individuals here who are able to stand and express themselves without oppression or express the ways in which they feel oppressed, and without deprivation, or express the ways in which they have felt deprived and overcome that. And those stories of the personal expressions of authentic self in the context of social justice, from my unique perspective as a single individual, are a path to gaining more interest and gaining more engagement with the Antioch experience when those stories are told and communicated effectively from our alums and students of the new Antioch.
Hear, hear. Yes. Hank.
Yeah, well, getting back to the community aspects of this, working in New York City, I'm a psychiatrist and I've always been interested in education. But what struck me is how different it is to work at different levels. If you try to do something with the Board of Education in New York City, it's Byzantine. You can't find anybody to talk to. If you want to do something in the Bronx, where we're down to 4 or 5 billion people, you can work individually with particular schools. And in the small village where I work, Larchmont, you have cocktails with the Board of Education on Saturday night. It's much more personal. And to get back what Michael said about executions that the government performs, I wrote one letter to the AMA, which ended in them declaring participation of physicians in execution being unethical. So you have I was always surprised about the range and how different one has to operate at different levels, depending on the community and the size of the community and the composition of the community.
Agreed. I also like that, we're trying to think about how is our smallness right now. We'd like to be slightly less small, but our smallness a strength rather than a deficit. And I think, Hank, to your point, there are things one can do in smaller communities and impacts one can have, and insights about how communities work and how you can create change in them that might be more possible in a place like Antioch of our size. I'm conscious of time, but I want to give Joan a chance to weigh in again. And then Janice. Oh, Joan, I think you're muted still.
Yes, just a very quick suggestion. I'm wondering if the reunion committee would consider the possibility of organizing classroom visits during or before reunion. So if people came during, say, work week and visited classes, are there classes going on during July? I'm responding to the person who wants to audit classes. I thought that would be a good opportunity for people to get a little taste of how the classroom feels right now.
Duly noted. It might be the opposite. It might be on the back end of reunion rather than the front end, but Tristan is on the call and who works in advancement help us remember that idea. I like it. Janice, you get the last word.
Yeah, good. Yeah, I've been thinking for a long time about the idiocy of the November-December section. And I think the June-July section, when nothing happens or there's been like nothing for students, I think Jane was concerned about that as well. But one of the ideas that we've always put together on our West Coast San Francisco group is having alumni come in and teach some courses during those periods to enlarge the amount of stuff that students can get, because there's a very small faculty, obviously, and there are a lot of very, very competent teachers out there. So I wanted to throw that out because because that's something that would, I think, be very helpful for the college to have more stuff, economics, science, whatever, for students to take during that period instead of just sitting around doing nothing.
Duly noted, and certainly I have my own observations about both what isn't happening, but what's also possible during those periods of November, December, and July, August, and this November, December, is our most successful yet in terms of a small bunch of really special classes that have the highest number of students and student credit hours and revenue than we've ever had. And then looking ahead, especially to the July, August block, as an opportunity to not expand our offerings to our current students, but to expand our offerings in order to expand the folks who come and have a good learning experience at Antioch, be it for a 4-year degree or for a short-term institute or workshop, credit or non-credit, and looking at that as an opportunity to benefit from some of the gifts and knowledge of our alumni base. So that's actively in the works. So thanks, Janice. I am conscious of folks' time, and I promised Tristan that we would try to end roughly on time. So I want to thank everybody for your time and getting a small window into the neat things that are happening on the faculty with the current students, and how that's, I think, both an extension of a long history and mission, but also an adaptation of it for the needs of the world and the needs of our current students. I hope that you'll join us for future panels where we'll give you a peek at other emerging interdisciplinary strengths around social innovation and social entrepreneurship, around global engagement, around socially engaged arts, in addition to the one we had today on social justice and last month on sustainability. That'll give you a little bit of a sense of the good things happening now, as well as us to learn from how that resonates and ideas coming from folks who had an experience at an earlier moment at Antioch. So thanks to all of you, and thank you to Tristan for organizing us, and thanks to Michael, Kevin, Carey, and Jennifer for taking some time out of your evening to share some of your good work as teachers and scholars and citizens. Thanks, everybody.